Good morning, everyone. 680 News is reporting Ford government announces York region will revert to a modified Stage 2 as of Monday, October 19th. More to come. Today's Saturday, the 17th. Breaking, Doug Ford says the decision to enforce modified Stage 2 restrictions in York region did not come easily. Effective Monday, October 19th, York will join Toronto, Peel, and Ottawa in Stage 2. And, well, here's PhD in common sense, and he says, where's the second wave? 23 people died. Ontario reporting they don't actually know how many died from COVID-19 or from their pre-existing conditions, and 188 in ICU in the entire nation. Weak flu, and there's comparison, right? I've been looking at the numbers of cases. I've been looking at the numbers of death and ICU numbers, and if you look at the ICU and hospitalization numbers, there is no reason to panic. However, if you listen to the politicians, time for panic was last week and we should be fully locked down. It's very, very interesting. Very interesting. And I don't think it's based in fact. I don't think the data calls for this. I don't think that the public health officials should be able to lock people down like this. I think that there should be a vote every time. And where's the emergency order? Is there an emergency order that needs to take place, or is Doug Ford just able to put people back into lockdown phase 2 and destroy their businesses willy-nilly, at will, whenever he decides, right? Based on, whatever deal he's made with China. Because here's the thing. The Hunter Biden agreement has me thinking, right? The hard drives that contain, there's 3 hard drives. The first one contained Hunter Biden stuff. If Hunter Biden was that compromised to China, and that led directly to the vice president's office, what else do they have, and to who, right? What level of government are they targeting? I think all levels of government. And I don't think they're just stopping with the United States. It looks like the United States can prove theirs. I'm just interested in the actions of our leaders and what they're choosing to do. Well, we'll get there in just a minute. Doug Ford's flying the China flag. Do you remember that? And there's other places that fly the flag of communist China as well. Is that signaling fealty? What is going on? Right? There is some serious news being suppressed on big websites, Facebook and Twitter. They're suppressing the big story from the New York Post. And the big story from the New York Post, if you think about it, if you extrapolate it out and fill in some of the spots, I've been watching videos and I've seen some stuff that is talking about what the rest of the drops could be, speculation. But the point of the speculation was that China was actively getting dirt on people in power or their family in order to control the people in power, and then basically paying them off and making it comfortable for them to remain in power and just, do what China says. So I again say, I wonder why Mr. Ford is doing what he's doing with the lockdowns with regard to ignoring the data, right? Ignoring what people want and destroying the small businesses. Who's going to walk in there now? Who's going to buy up the properties now? Who's going to do that? Think about it. Here's a little meme that I liked. I thought the ethics commissioner door and the liberal door and the footsteps in between going back and forth. Oh, we've just got to go in here and talk to the, right? Got to figure it out. I don't know. Here's Jeffrey York, and he says, Canada's controversial We Charity, already facing investigations in Canada, is now the subject of a separate review in Kenya. Kenya's NGO, non-governmental organization coordination board, today said it's looking into regulatory and governance matters, including assets and officials of WE's Kenya branch. We Charity operates in Kenya as Free the Children, an NGO that was registered in Kenya in 2008. It runs schools, clinics, and an extensive volunteer program for Canadian youths who travel to Kenya. And this is a thread that I'm not going to go through for the rest of it, but the link is in the description. Here is Chris Selly, and says, nobody should tolerate the Liberals' hideous tricks to hide We documents. Now, this is an interesting turn, and I think that this is interesting to point out, and that's why I'm reading this article. But the government wants to say that COVID is more important than dealing with this corruption. That's how they're trying to get out of dealing with this corruption. Okay, and so let's read this, and this is why I think this is interesting. Okay, 21 hours of useless wrangling between the government on Thursday, between the committees that were happening Thursday, refusing to allow votes on motions concerning the Liberal Party's We Charity debacle. Liberal members of the Finance Committee spent 11 hours on Thursday filibustering, moving hopeless amendments, and otherwise avoiding a vote on a motion condemning heavy redactions in We-related emails released in August. These redactions were numerous enough that Philip Dufresne, the independent parliamentary law clerk, and even Wayne Easter, the Liberal chair of the committee, expressed some concern. Now, however, Liberals will move heaven and earth to keep those black lines where they are, and they don't mind how ridiculous they look doing it. To wit, also on Thursday, Liberals on the Ethics Committee spent 10 hours avoiding a vote on a motion to have the Speaker's Spotlight booking agency release receipts of various Trudeau paid speaking appearances over the years. The proceedings saw Liberal MPs Han Dong expound at length about racism directed against Asian Canadians during the pandemic. When opposition MPs objected on grounds of relevance, Liberal MP Greg Fergus accused them of performing the microaggressions that a lot of Canadians of color face. Absolutely hideous. It's like Twitter come to life. It's all about COVID right now. This is what's critical for Canadians, Liberal MP Brenda Shanahan complained last week during another Marathon Ethics Committee session. How is this not all about COVID? Okay, so the Liberals are saying this should be more about COVID, but here's the point. The government came up with, this is the author's words, not mine. The government came up with a very weird sub-minimum wage summer jobs program to help young Canadians weather the COVID storm. Farmed it out to cronies, and then it all exploded into 1,000 pieces. And this is me now. Why did it explode into 1,000 pieces? Because Trudeau gave $1 billion, or $912 million, to buddies who were paying his parents, right? Who were paying his family members and potentially friends and other Liberal connected agencies, right? And this agency that Miss Wernick, the brother of former Privy Council clerk, or the sister of former Privy Council clerk Michael Wernick, is the public servant who said to do this, right? So the brother or the sister of the former Privy Council clerk pushes this through onto Bardish Chagger, and Bill Morneau disappears. Okay, well, hold on. Let me finish this. Farmed it out to cronies, and then it all exploded into 1,000 pieces. Trudeau apologized for not recusing himself in a light of appearances, fees paid for We events to his brother and mother. Morneau apologized for not recusing himself in light of his daughter working for We and vanished in a puff of smoke. Right, so Morneau lost his ministry and his seat in the legislature. It doesn't matter, though, because he's married to the McCain heiress. He's a very rich man in his own right. Morneau Chappelle. Look into Chappelle. He doesn't like Morneau very much. And he's now vying for another financial position. And now we've got Freeland as the finance minister. It's unbelievable. And these documents, they don't want them to come out, right? So the explosion of the want to focus on COVID, if they want the confidence of anybody, and they don't have the confidence of the people at this point in time, people are upset. And there are a lot of people who like Trudeau. And I've said before, the polls show a lot of people are in support of the Liberals and in support of the left in general, the Greens, the NDP, the left, right? But I don't think people are happy with this. I don't think people are okay with this. And polls, as I've said before, can be made to say whatever they want, right? So the support could be fictional. And really, who knows? Because you'd be silenced, right? It doesn't matter if masks work. It doesn't matter what science you have behind it. If it's not the correct zeitgeist, if you're not following what the Liberals want, you're a Nazi, right? You're a racist Nazi. You're probably a racist and you're a Nazi. Racist Nazi. Here is, doesn't he look like a cartoon character? He's a bit of a cartoon character here. He says he questions whether Canadians are still engaged with the We probe. I'm not sure Canadians need to know how much money Margaret Trudeau made 6 years ago when they're looking at COVID-19 rates still going up exceedingly high. It's about COVID, right? It's more about COVID. Fear, 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 fear. Listen to the patter. This is classic Liberal bait and switch. They're trying to, the Indiana Jones thing where he's got the rock and he's trying to pick up the thing, right? That's what they're trying to do. Here you go.
And they're looking at, COVID rates still going up exceedingly high in Ontario, Quebec, and throughout Canada. It's coming back in places. I mean, this is the job of the opposition. The challenge for the Conservatives is they had this one-hit wonder in the summer, and it knocked the Liberals back a little bit. They were at about 40% in the polls around June. But now the Liberals are back at 36, where they were through April into May. So I get what they're trying to do here. They're trying to get lightning to strike is when someone has a surprise hit movie and then they quickly get out a sequel. I know what you did last summer. I still know what you did last summer at committee. I'm not sure that Canadians are all that engaged with this right now. I think there was a huge amount of time. At one point, there were 4 committees looking into this. I'm not sure Canadians really need to know how much money Margaret Trudeau made 6 years ago. When they're looking at, COVID rates still going up exceedingly high in Ontario, Quebec.
So I messed up my queuing on that, but I jumped it back there. So he says, I don't know that people are really interested in this. At one point, there's 4 committees looking at this, but implying that's no longer the case. The government got prorogued to stop those 4 committees. Dirty tricks from the Liberals to stop those committees, and now dirty tricks to stop the wee stuff coming out. Here is Michael Barrett, and he says, well, I think the Canadians don't like corruption, and this is pretty blatant corruption. Here we go.
I've heard from members of the committee that, this isn't Main Street, this is Ottawa bubble, this isn't what, people want us to focus on. Well, I can tell you, folks of any political stripe don't like corruption and they don't like cover-ups, and that's what this is.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You can support the Liberals. You can say I'm a Liberal person. I support the NDP. I support the Greens. Whatever it is, sure. And you might even be able to convince yourself. You might. But when you see the depth of corruption, the depth of the lies, and the extent to which they're going to keep it under wraps, I think that most people, regardless of their political stripe, would say, yeah, that was in our best interest. I'm glad that they kept that from us. I'm glad we didn't know and we couldn't make an informed decision about it. I'm glad the NDP and the Liberals made a backroom deal. I don't think there's anybody who would be on board with that. Although they are trying to change the political discord to be, I've seen the guy who was saying, I'll do what's morally right, and he can morally justify setting buildings on fire because he doesn't like Donald Trump. So they've really poisoned the well with regard to being able to think and evaluate things critically for yourself, right? To sit there and go, yeah, that's probably a good move, or no, that's not the best move. I don't think lighting this building on fire is going to help, right? Or be a good net positive thing. So I'm not convinced that we're going to have that big shift away from the Liberals, right? I hope we do. I hope I can see that. But again, I don't trust Mr. O'Toole. Getting into Mr. O'Toole, here's a little bit of China news. China stuff is happening. Prime Minister Trudeau says Canada won't stop calling out China for coercive diplomacy. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says his government will not stop standing up for human rights in China or calling out Beijing for its coercive approach to diplomacy. Trudeau says that includes the situation in Hong Kong, where pro-democracy activists have been protesting a widely criticized national security law imposed on the territory by Beijing. On Thursday, the Chinese ambassador to Canada warned Ottawa against granting asylum to Hong Kong residents fleeing the situation, saying it amounts to interfering in China's internal affairs. Kong Pew, sorry if I got that wrong, said if Canada cares about 300,000 Canadian citizens in Hong Kong and Canadian companies doing business there, it should support efforts to fight what he called violent crime. Trudeau said that Canadians need to know their government will stand up for them around the world. Trudeau has said, if that sounded to you like a threat, like if Canadians care about the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong and the companies doing business there, it should support. If that sounded like a threat to you, it sounded like a threat to me, and it sounded like a threat to Mr. O'Toole as well. The rest of this article doesn't really matter, so I'm not going to go back to it. But essentially, the ambassador to Canada from China threatened us, and here's what. While Trudeau hasn't done anything yet, here's what Mr. O'Toole says. A threat to Canadians anywhere is a threat to Canadians everywhere. My statement on the Chinese ambassador's remarks about those fleeing Hong Kong to seek asylum in Canada. That says the Honourable Aaron O'Toole, blah, blah, blah. The Chinese ambassador has decided to engage in belligerent rhetoric unbecoming of his office. To be clear, this was a threat to the 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong, and a barely veiled one at that. It was one of the kind of tone and tenor one would expect from someone seeking protection money, not someone who is the official emissary of a member of the United Nations Security Security Council. A threat to Canadians anywhere is a threat to Canadians everywhere. Conservatives are therefore calling on the ambassador to fully retract his remarks and issue a public apology. Should the ambassador fail to do so expeditiously, we expect the government to withdraw his credentials. We are also calling on the Trudeau government to put in place a clear and expedited path for pro-democracy protesters and political refugees fleeing Hong Kong for Canada, to make it clear that only the Canadian government will determine who does and does not get admitted to this country. 2, impose Maginski sanctions against those responsible for imposing a draconian national security law in violation of the Sino-British Joint Declaration and international treaty. Canada is a smaller country on an economic basis when compared to China, but our commitment to liberty, human rights, and the rule of law towers above the conduct of this ambassador. So, I mean, that's interesting, right? That's interesting. Another interesting thing is, here's a Melbourne police station raising the Communist China flag. Here's police in Australia arresting an Australian for flying their flag. He walks out flying the Australian flag. I don't exactly know the context here, but the police jump on him. I guess he's not allowed to do this, and the police say, yeah, you're being arrested. So this is Australia, and this was actually should have been shown in the other order. Australia police arresting the protester for flying the Australia flag, and the police station honoring a police state outrages Melbourne cop shop raises Chinese communist flag. So sorry about the order there. That's the reasoning for that. And well, remember this: Ontario legislature criticized for decision to fly China's flag. Yeah, and they didn't end up flying it, but what's going on here, right? Can you see the things that are similar, and can you see where this is headed, right? Why are we kowtowing to China? Why is the Chinese ambassador threatening us? I know the answers to these things, right? I understand. It was at the top of the show talking about Hunter Biden and the lengths to which the Chinese Communist Party will go to gain control of foreign powers. And here we are, right? Like, this happened on September 29th to not much fanfare. Not many people cared. You can see also there's been times where fast cars show up at like Toronto intersections and put like little Chinese flags out the window. Canadians don't understand what that means. You should understand what that means, right? You should understand what flying the flag of a foreign nation like this means. And they did this to coordinate. As somebody checked for me, the time differential was off. They did it on September 30th to coincide with the timing of the flying of the flag in Beijing for the founding of the CCP, like the Chinese Communist Party, right? Like, it was coordinated to be flown at the same time. That's really, really concerning, right? Here's another money thing. Feds kept most COVID-19 contracts secret under national security exemption. The thing is, the COVID stuff is bleeding into personal freedoms. So like when I try and do a story, when I try and do politics stories, the COVID stuff almost takes over. It takes over for it takes over for a whole bunch of stuff because it's getting into personal freedoms, right? Like, they're using it to crack down on people to keep them at home, and to keep secret spent money. And okay, so so it's hard to split things into different shows. If I start talking about COVID, I have to bring it back to them using it to hide about the money. If I start talking about money, I have to point out this is about COVID, right? Like, so it's really kind of, it's hard to keep it all straight. Like, and I try and thread a story through this, right? I try and have sections, but it's really hard. It's really hard currently because it's all bleeding into each other. But it's really interesting. I'm enjoying it, but it's really, I hope that this is coming across the way it's in my head. Okay. So they're keeping the contract secret under national security laws. The federal government, Canadian federal government, cited a national security exemption to withhold details of a vast majority of its COVID-19 related contracts struck at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. Coronavirus, not COVID-19. The exemption expedited the weeks-long procurement process and keeps details of domestic and international contracts, including costs and supplier information, secret. Where are we getting this stuff from? Who's making those masks? Are those videos that we're seeing of a bunch of like men in a small room with like walking all over the masks that they're sewing and throwing on the floor? Is that where we're getting our masks from? Yes. Oh, And they spray them before they put them in the bags? Really? Okay. Back to this. A memo approved late in May, obtained by HuffPost Canada through an access to information request, recommended the Deputy Prime Minister of Public Services and Procurement Canada authorize the 2019-2020 Q4 proactive disclosure of contracts to not include those that are COVID related. Let's just not talk about that money. And despite that, here's HuffPost again. Canada's budget deficit has grown by more than any other G20 country amid pandemic. They are just printing money. It is an excuse. They are using it. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And they are maximizing this crisis. We seem to have lost the flu. I talked about this yesterday. Why isn't this a bigger story? The flu has disappeared, and the flu kills more children than COVID-19, right? Based on the numbers that we've got. But like 2020, we got no flu, right? This is from the WHO. Where did it go? Where did it go? Why isn't that news? Why doesn't anybody care about that? Why are we wearing masks? Did the masks make the flu disappear? Maybe that's a case for mask efficacy. If masks work like this, man, we killed the flu. We just left with COVID, right? And I don't believe that masks killed the flu. I believe that they're reclassifying the numbers to inflate COVID numbers because COVID didn't disappear, right? COVID's a bigger threat than ever if you listen to the news, right? But where's the flu? Where'd it go? One rule for the ruling class, another for you. Costco's CEO was granted special exemption from Canada's mandatory COVID-19 quarantine period in order to attend the opening of new outlets without having to isolate for 14 days on arrival. Do you think that you live in a free country still? Like I was saying, I talk a lot about how we live in a free country and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, like you got to just know the right people and then you get exempt, right? That's it. You don't have to quarantine for 14 days if you've been in the United States and you're a big CEO. No. Not in Canada, right? How much money are you bringing into the country? Very interesting. Rocco Gelati, remember this? Yesterday I reported that the Ottawa CTV News said health officials raised disinformation concerns with MPP Randy Hillier. Mr. Hillier responded, and he says, who's guilty of misinformation? Read the letter that was referred to in this story and judge for yourself. The word disinformation doesn't even appear in it. Further, I offered my boardroom to meet with them, and they'd be welcome to wear masks. Here's the letter, and I read through the letter. And they use a lot of the same rhetoric that the breathless Twitter bots that are like, but you have to understand you're stopping respiratory droplets, and respiratory droplets are the things that carry the virus, and blah, 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 blah. Have they not seen how big the virus is and what, like, the mask, how big the weave on the mask is? Like, these are facts. This is not, people aren't making it up. Masks don't stop respiratory virus. As far as I understand, all the science up until 2020. And after 2020, they use flawed models and they ignore data, right? They pull data out that is not, that doesn't back up what they want and ignore it as if it doesn't exist. Hydroxychloroquine, all sorts of data that shows masks don't work, and instead put up faulty models, and models are controlled by people. People set the mathematical principles of the model up. And if you don't know what the mathematical principles of the model are, then like you're just blindly believing these people. And the models have been wrong, right? Like Ontario is tracking below the absolute lowest modeling for this wave of COVID-19. It's unbelievable. Here's another Randy Hiller. So it's interesting to me that the public health officials are parroting the same bunk information, right? Here's one paragraph. It says, a face covering is a simple barrier to help prevent respiratory droplets from transferring into the air and onto other people. When the person wearing the face covering coughs, sneezes, talks, yells, or sings, their respiratory droplets are blocked and prevented from flying around in the air. That way, the person wearing a face covering is protected from their droplets, and their face covering is protecting them from other people's droplets reaching them. That's not true. And on Ontario's own website, it says wearing a face covering does not protect the wearer, number one. And most science that I've seen says non-medical, even N95 masks with ventilators are not preventing anything from being expelled. Most masks are not covering your face enough to prevent things from being expelled. And the virus is small enough that it just goes right through the weave, right? So you may be stopping respiratory droplets, but none of this looks like real science. None of it. And the people who are going along with it are like the yes men from the Nazi Germany and the yes men from the USSR. Like, you are not using your critical thinking skills. You are just doing your due diligence to keep your job. It's just like these cops, right? Where the Australian police officers, here they are. These guys, right? We're just doing our jobs. We're just doing our jobs and putting the Australian flag on the ground, right? And we'll just drop it. We'll drop it on the ground, and we're just doing our jobs. We got to keep our jobs, and you're not allowed to fly your flag, sir, right? Like, we got to stand up to this, right? Here's Randy Hiller again. He says there are two questions that must be answered. Did the actions of the Ford Nation lead to the premature deaths of thousands in long-term care? And do these actions constitute criminal negligence? Watch as I lay out some facts. And Dennis Rancourt says huge breaking. MPP Randy Hiller just laid out the criminal negligence of the Ontario government in this interview. Transfers of thousands of persons from hospital into care homes, sick elderly patients, persons barred from hospital care, locked into death chambers. I don't know about the death chambers. I'm listening to the interview. It's interesting. Here.
When you look at the facts, do these actions of our government constitute criminal negligence that led to the early death of thousands of people? So, when you look at the facts, do these actions of our government constitute criminal negligence that led to the early death of thousands of people? Those are the two questions I think that are fundamental and that need to be investigated and examined.
And there's an hour-long interview that discusses that. Worthwhile. Yes, it should be investigated and examined. Am I sure that we're going to get that robust investigation and examination? No, because we can't even get unredacted WE documents from a summer program that was supposed to replace the usual summer program that didn't get funding because Trudeau said, no, I've got a better idea. I'm going to give it to my crony buddies who are going to kick back money to my family. Right? Like, it's offensive. It's offensive. Here's the Ottawa Citizen. Province proposing sweeping childcare rule changes to create more spaces as sector in pandemic crisis. Open us up. You're lying. You're lying. It's simple as that. I reported on this years ago, like 2018, maybe 2017 even. It was one of my first weekend, I was digging into something and I thought, man, this is crazy. Recycling, right? We can finally admit that plastic recycling has been a sham all along. After generations of governments at all levels promoting recycling with Slavic zeal, we now have the confession, recycling of plastics has mostly been a crock. Yeah, it's a crock. It's an absolute crock. And it was sold to governments in the 80s to get to get soda, like pop, because that's what we call it in Ontario, pop, sold in plastic bottles instead of the big, heavy, expensive glass ones. Do you remember the glass ones? I remember going through the grocery aisle and there was the big glass bottles of cola. Man, those things were really heavy. And then they said, it's going to pay for itself, this recycling thing. It was made in Kitchener, I think. And as I said, I did a whole big deep dive on it before. And that basically came to the same conclusion that we're sending garbage around the world and the garbage is garbage there, but they get money for taking it. So they take it and then, deal with it, right? Some of it's recycled, but my kids watch a show called Blaze and I watch it. And I was watching it with them the other day and there was a song about recycling and they took some garbage and they made it into something new. And I was like, hold on, kids. You understand that doesn't happen, right? That doesn't work. You can't take garbage and make a laser gun or whatever the heck it was they made. And my daughter kind of looked at me quizzically because she's in grade 3. And I was like, aha, yes, no, you can't do that. You can't, that's not, I said, then we started talking about solar power. And I said, do you think solar power would power our TV at nighttime? And my daughter was like, huh. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And she was like, well, but batteries. And I said, yeah, but batteries run out. And then what if there's no sun and no batteries? How do you get, what if your laptop's dead at 9:00 p.m. because you've been using it since 7:00 p.m. and the sun went down at 6? And well, she was not old enough to understand the math of that. But I said, what if your battery runs out and there's no sun? And she basically sat there and was like, oh, okay. And I said, we use oil and gas to counter that. Okay, Daddy. So, you've got to do the little lessons, right? But we all live in the same world and everybody, even people who are well-meaning, believe the rhetoric, the lies, because they are lies and the people who are propagating them know they're lies, are everywhere. They're everywhere. So it's taken as fact and it's fantasy. It's complete and utter fantasy. And here's another fact. Making people poor makes them less healthy, right? So destroying these businesses is going to hurt Canadians directly, much more than COVID-19 will. Okay, that's enough for me. Sorry, I feel like today's been unorganized, so I'm sorry if it's unorganized. It's maybe a little bumpy today, more bumpy than usual, so I apologize. Thanks for watching. Check out CanadaPoly.com, check out CanadaReport.co, check out SpeakingMoistly.co, and have a wonderful, wonderful